Hi, I'm Bonni London, and I am so excited because this is my first podcast. And I am very honored because my first guest, Dr. Chris Knobbe, who is a physician and public health advocate and just wrote his second book, The Ancestral Diet. He is shedding the light on all the things seed oil and how dangerous they are, how they got introduced to our diet, how they are a major contributor to the obesity epidemic, and possibly even more than sugar, believe it or not, as these stay in our body. But you are not going to want to miss this because he has done his homework. He has at least 1,100 or 1,200 references in his latest book, and I really would love to hear your feedback after today. So let's dive in. Hello there, everyone, and welcome Dr. Chris Knobbe, a physician, researcher, ophthalmologist, public health advocate, and associate clinical professor emeritus. I don't know if I pronounced that right, forgive me. Yeah. Formerly of the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. And he is primarily known for his research, publications, and presentations connecting Westernized diets with the highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils to numerous chronic diseases, including coronary heart disease, hypertension, stroke, cancers, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity, Alzheimer's, autoimmune disease, and age-related macular degeneration. His research has focused greatly on the vegetable oil hypothesis as the primary driver of overweight and chronic disease. And in 2016, Kenobi's formally introduced the hypothesis that processed food and vegetable oils are the primary driver of AMD, which is the leading cause of irreversible vision loss and blindness in people over the age of 50 worldwide. And most recently, I want to mention, he also wrote 2 books. Of one, I have both of them, but I did just complete reading The Ancestral Diet, which I cannot say enough about, and all the graphs and references. It is a must read for anyone who's interested in these topics. So welcome today. I'm excited for our conversation. But I do want to begin with the question.
Thank you, Bonni.
Okay. My first
I just want to say thank you. I appreciate being able to be on your show. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. So I wanted to know what started your journey in this, because you had a traditional medical practice, ophthalmologist, right? And what started you on this and opened your eyes, turned the corner?
Yeah, what really led me down this path, Bonni, is my own suffering, desperation, really. And the desperation being that I was suffering with arthritis that began when I was 33, so almost 3 decades ago, and was progressive up until I was 50 years old. And I learned a little bit about the paleo diet from Lauren Cordain's book, The Paleo Answer, that year. That was 2011. And I made some significant changes in my diet that year. And within a few days, literally, my arthritis was dramatically improved. Improved more than what 3 medications had ever improved my arthritis before. And this was just life-changing. And so I read Lauren Cordain's book, The Paleo Answer, and I began to investigate nutrition myself for a couple of years. And then I came across the work of Weston A. Price, and I began to understand that processed foods, mostly refined flours, sugars, vegetable oils, canned goods, sweets, those kinds of foods were driving chronic disease, overweight. Well, this really didn't come from Price's work necessarily, but in his work, it was mostly degenerative diseases like arthritis and cancers and birth defects and so forth, and dental decay. But I just kept investigating, and I developed the hypothesis that once I understood that processed foods were driving overweight, obesity, and all this chronic disease, I hypothesized that the same processed foods might be driving age-related macular degeneration, or AMD, which is the leading cause of irreversible vision loss and blindness in people over the age of 50 worldwide. So I began to investigate that, Bonni, and for about a year and a half until early 2015. And I was so convinced that hypothesis held water that I left my ophthalmology practice and began to pursue that full time, and formed a small group. And we evaluated that hypothesis by looking at food consumption data, tracking processed foods using vegetable oils and sugars as proxy markers of processed foods. And the data in 25 nations, every single nation that we studied, supported that hypothesis. So I published a paper, published a book, started a nonprofit organization. And anyway, by about 2018 or 2019, I just kept finding in my research that the huge driver of all of this disease, including macular degeneration, was the vegetable oils. And there just wasn't a lot of discussion about this. And I didn't feel like anyone was doing it quite the justice that it deserved. And so really, I've been on a trek now for about the past 5 years. I really started this in 2018 and kind of went public with it in 2019, connecting vegetable oils specifically as the major driver of obesity and coronary heart disease, strokes, cancer, diabetes, metabolic disease, macular degeneration, autoimmune, on and on and on. So that's been my focus over these past 5 years. And that's what this new book, The Ancestral Diet Revolution, is all about. It's very light on macular degeneration. It's very heavy on all of these other, like the obesity, coronary heart disease, cancers, diabetes, metabolic disease. So that kind of brings you up to date.
Yes. Well, maybe you could explain a little bit about how, these oils came into our diet, but also, compared to other fats that have existed in nature for, since the beginning of time, what is so unique about these particular oils that has made them particularly, problematic?
Yes, that's a great question. So if you look at, and we have a paper that's submitted for publication right now, where we've tried to look at the history of vegetable oils, because it's never really been published in a scientific paper, but the history of vegetable oils and their consumption on a global basis, with some emphasis on the United States, but because that's where the data is the best in terms of going back to the 19th century. And we've already published data on vegetable oils in the 19th century in the US. But anyway, if you look at throughout all of history, almost no one ever had any kinds of vegetable oils. There was trivial amounts throughout history of coconut oil, palm oil or palm kernel oil, sesame oil, a few others, and then olive oil, but only, again, all of them together collectively were consumed in trivial amounts throughout history. And then beginning about 1866, in the United States, cottonseed oil was the first seed oil introduced into the food supply. And Americans really didn't want it. They weren't interested in consuming an oil that they knew only as a lamp oil or machine oil previously. So the manufacturers were trying to sell it as food. And that really didn't go over very well, since, as I said, people thought of it as machine oil and lamp oil mostly. And so manufacturers, not to be deterred, they decided to to sell it by adulterating other products with it. One of the first things they did was create margarine. They called it oleomargarine, and eventually it became shortened to margarine, but that was a mix of cottonseed oil and butter. And then they would even use colorant to try to keep the color more like butter. They would, use a yellow dye in that. Then they began to adulterate olive oil and sell olive oil to customers in the U.S. and in Europe. So they were adulterating olive oil in the 1870s. In fact, the French made complaint in 1880 because we'd shipped something like 55,000 barrels, if I remember right. It might have been a lot more, but anyway, a huge number of barrels of so-called olive oil, and they knew it wasn't. They knew it had been adulterated, and they stopped importing our so-called olive oil altogether. And then in 1911, Procter & Gamble introduced Crisco, which is the first ever industrially produced trans fat. But Crisco is a hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, so it came out of the cottonseed oil industry as well. And so gradually, what happened is that manufacturers began to sort of sneak the vegetable oils into the food supply. And then with Crisco, and then in 1909, they introduced soybean oil, and then all the others came. Bonni, after that we've got soybean, cottonseed, then we got eventually, rapeseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, sesame, peanut oils, canola oil, all of these other oils that were introduced into the food supply because of the fact that there is lots of money to be made. These oils were roughly about 1/6 the cost to produce as compared to butter. And Crisco, of course, they formulated it to look like lard. And so they were using margarine to outsell butter, which is, again, a mix of butter and some type of vegetable oil. And they were using Crisco to supplant and replace lard, right? And that's exactly what they accomplished. And so gradually, the food supply became more and more heavily laden with these vegetable oils. And I'll give you some numbers here. So if, for example, our data shows in 1865, an average American had zero consumption of vegetable oils. We had none. By 1900, we were about 1 gram a day. By 1909, we were at 9 grams a day because soybean oil was introduced that year. By 1961, we're at 19 grams a day. By 2010, we're at 80 grams per person per day. Well, 80 grams is 720 calories. That's 32% of U.S. caloric intake.
That's crazy. And I just want to mention, because one of these things that really caught my attention in reading the book is, of course, something that these companies had to overcome when they were making these oils. And that is the fact that the oils are rancid and they need to deodorize them. And
yes,
if you could speak about that a little bit, because I think, when you give the example of someone, would you ever eat, like 4-day-old fish or rotten fish oil? I think everyone can appreciate that in their mind, like immediately, but yet we're consuming all of these equally rancid fats, but they have gone through this chemical process. So maybe you could explain about that a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. Before I do, let me just mention this, let me get the big picture out there real quick to the audience. I know you know this, but so what people probably don't understand is that, for example, obesity in the United States, and roughly the same around all the world probably, but obesity in the United States in men age 18 to 80 in the 19th century, so 1800 to 1900 roughly, 1.2%. Diabetes was effectively unknown, 0.0028%. That's 2.8 per 100,000 people in 1890. cancers were relatively rare in the early 19th century. Only 1 in 188 people died of cancer. By 1900, 1 in 17 people died of cancer. By 2010, 1 in 3 people die of cancer. Coronary heart disease was unknown in the 19th century. There's 8 scientific papers on coronary heart disease for that entire century. Physicians had never seen heart attacks by the end of the 19th century. Essentially, almost no one in the world had. 1912 was the first documented heart attack in the US. By the 1930s, coronary heart disease became the leading cause of death. It's still the leading cause of death. 1 out of 3 people die of coronary heart disease. Age-related macular degeneration, virtually unknown between 1851 and 1930. Less than 50 cases in all the world's literature. By 2020, 196 million people affected with the disease. Alzheimer's disease, 1 case in 1908, 4 cases in 1911, several hundred cases by 1970. Today, 55 million cases in the world and 10 million new cases of dementia per year. So all this chronic disease just exploded, and it all runs in parallel with the vegetable oils. Oh, and obesity, I didn't mention. So obesity, climbed from 1.2% in 1900 to 13% in 1960 to 42.5% by 2018 in the US. And diabetes went from 0.0028% in 1890 to 13% by 2016 in the US. That's an increase of 4,643-fold. So all of this ties together. So, okay, so back to your question about, well, how are these made? Well, first of all, the vegetable oils require that the seeds, these are mostly come from seeds, which is why the better term for most of them is seed oils, but these seeds are crushed, heated, pressed, then they're chemically alkalinized, bleached, and deodorized before they go into the bottle. They're highly oxidized. And as Bonni was mentioning, they need to be deodorized. Well, this deodorization step, it's typically 4 or 5 stages of high temperature heating up to a temperature of around 500 degrees Fahrenheit several times in order to remove the stench from these oils. These oils would stink badly because they're so oxidized, the equivalent of decaying fish. So when you have the reason that they do, and I need to go back to your earlier question too, is what makes these different? Well, the omega-6 fat is really high in vegetable oils, and it is naturally very low in all natural food. The omega-6 is really low. But it tends to run from 20 to 80% in vegetable oils. And those omega-6 fats, they're the ones that they tend to oxidize. And when they oxidize, they would stink, just like the omega-3 fats and omega-6 in fish. When they oxidize, which is basically this, part of the decaying process, they stink. And so if it weren't for the deodorization step, which was perfected way back around 1900, nobody would be eating vegetable oils because they would stink, and they'd make your food stink and taste awful. But that step allows them to get them into the food supply, and they're virtually odorless and tasteless.
It makes it hard to understand how we can even call these things food, because they've been so, I think it's, not, but thinking about oxidation, right. If you could talk specifically just for a minute about, the diet heart hypothesis and the oxidized LDL cholesterol and the connection, with these seed oils, and why, we really are maybe eliminating the wrong fats here.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So to do this in 1 minute, I'll try. Here's what I found. First of all, Well, we'll make it very quick, and then we can dig back into whatever you want, Bonnie. So, but let me get we'll get the high level view out of the way, and that's what I prefer, and everybody else probably prefers anyway. So, think of it this way. First of all, everyone, is that there's been all kinds of populations that have incredibly high saturated fat consumption, like the Maasai warriors of Kenya and Tanzania that consumed 40 to 46% of their diet as saturated fat, yet had virtually no heart disease. The Tokelauans of the South Pacific in the 1960s, their diet was 50% saturated fat coming from coconut oil, yet they had no heart disease. 19th century Americans consumed on average about 225 pounds of meat per year, yet had no heart disease. They were consuming, on average, probably around 10 to 12 ounces, the adults anyway, 10 to 12 ounces of meat. That's all meat per day. That could be, when I say meat, I mean most of that would be beef and pork, some chicken, and some fish. So the bulk of it was pork or beef and pork. But anyway, they had no heart disease. And so what we see this precise parallel between the increase in vegetable oils and the increase in heart disease. And like the saturated fat was flat through the entire 20th century, while coronary heart disease was going through the roof. So it made out, if you could have taken our published data and looked at it back in 1960, no one probably would have ever even begun to point the finger at saturated fat as a cause of heart disease. So if you look at every single population that has heart disease, they're all consuming vegetable oils. And if you look at all of the populations, like all the hunter-gatherers, the subsistence agriculturists, the horticulturists, the tribes essentially that don't have heart disease all around the world, none of them have vegetable oils, right? Where would they get vegetable oils? Because vegetable oils are a product of the Industrial Revolution. And so that tells you a lot right there. What I think is happening at the molecular level is that it is not just LDL cholesterol that drives heart disease. Very simply, it is oxidized LDL cholesterol. That is the only thing that can be taken up into the vascular wall and begin and propagate that atherosclerotic plaque, which ultimately results in the heart attack when under certain circumstances. But what drives the oxidized LDL? Well, it is ultimately high omega-6 or vegetable oils, because the omega-6 linoleic acid is incorporated into the LDL cholesterol molecule, and it goes rancid. It rapidly oxidizes. And when it oxidizes, your body wants to quickly remove that dangerous product from the blood. And so it does. And in the process, it forms an atherosclerotic plaque. And as those progress, if they ultimately can rupture, and that's where and then a clot forms there, and that's how you develop a heart attack, or potentially a certain type of stroke, or you could close off blood supply to part of your leg or something like that, for example. So it's very, very simply, I don't think, in my belief system, I don't think it's possible to develop coronary heart disease without high omega-6 diet, which means vegetable oils, or possibly large amounts of animals, monogastric animals that get high omega-6, like corn and soy fed chicken and pork, and then also possibly large amounts of nuts and seeds, because nuts and seeds are very high in omega-6. So we're not meant to be eating those as staples. So that was more than a minute, but that's the big overview right there.
So getting an egg white omelet cooked in, seed oil back in the kitchen is probably not the best idea, because they're still on the menu. and they
Yeah,
charge
if you
extra
want to
for
make,
it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, have an omelet with all, with all the eggs you want, if they're ancestrally raised, which means the chickens are not being fed corn and soy. That makes their omega-6 low. And cook the eggs in butter. So I cook everything in butter. We cook everything in butter. If you need a lot of oil, I would suggest using coconut oil because it's 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. But all the other oil, I mean, if you want to keep it really simple, I would avoid edible oils in general.
Well, I am on board with that. But obviously there's been a big switch in pushing people to these seed oils to lower the LDL cholesterol. But of course, I know it's been correlated with overall, higher mortality risk as well.
Right, and I say something that's it's factual and rather humorous all at the same time. I often introduce this at the beginning of my presentations, that the major the most prestigious nutrition institutions in the world, Harvard School of Public Health, Tufts University Nutrition Department, Mayo Clinic's Nutrition Department, Cleveland Clinic, the American Heart Association, on, they all tell us to consume the so-called heart healthy vegetable oils. And why do they tell us to consume these? And the answer is one single reason. That is that they lower our cholesterol. And then I say, and guess what? So does arsenic. And this is absolutely true. Arsenic lowers your cholesterol. Arsenic does the very same things to us pathophysiologically that vegetable oil, that the seed oils do, because they both work through similar mechanisms. Their primary mechanism of action that's dangerous is oxidation. And by the way, Bonni, I'll just say to your audience that there's 4 major pillars of danger through high omega-6 diets and vegetable oils. And that is that they are pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, directly toxic through advanced lipid oxidation end products, and they're nutrient deficient. Vegetable oils do not contain vitamins A, D, or K2. None of them, of the vegetables, including the healthy ones like coconut oil, palm kernel oil, and good quality authentic olive oil. They do not contain those vitamins. The healthy animal fats like lard, butter, and beef tallow, all traditionally raised, which is important to understand and follow, those contain vitamins A, D, and K2. They are non-pro-oxidative, non-pro-inflammatory, non-toxic. They do not contain advanced lipid oxidation end products to any significant degree, and they have the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K2. So you just have, they're just at polar opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of, the animal fats traditionally raised are brilliantly healthy and, proven. The populations that consume only those are incredibly healthy. And the populations consuming the most vegetable oils like Americans and, the Israelis, for example, in Israel, we're some of the populations in the worst possible health.
Yeah, so I always like to explain, listen, if you want to be lean and healthy, then you want to eat animals and lean and healthy. And currently these animals we're eating, when you see the fat, that's in the muscle, I mean, that's a sign of insulin resistance. And I thought that was a very interesting topic in your book as well, with diabetes and talking about China and a lot of the discussion with sugar, because of course sugar has been demonized. And I don't think you would suggest that sugar or eating high processed carbs is a good idea either. But at the same time, they're very different, and what happens when you consume these things, as those can be burned. And of course, the seed oils are very different. But if you could talk about that a bit, I think that would be interesting.
Yes, absolutely. So you reviewed my viewpoint exactly right. After studying this for 12 years and really trying to understand this, and I just want to say I don't have any hidden agenda. I don't get paid to do this work, by the way. I work for nonprofit organizations. I don't accept compensation from those organizations. I don't accept royalties from my book. I don't care what the answers are, Bonni, in terms of health. I'm just trying to find the correct answers, and for myself and my friends and family and you and everyone I reach out to. So I'm a public health advocate. I'm just here to try to get to the right answers. Well, all of the evidence has led me to believe that it is the vegetable oils, the highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils or seed oils, that are by far and away the most dangerous. If we look at, in comparison, sugar and refined flours, they definitely are problematic, in my view, if they take up significant amounts of the diet, because of the fact that they are nutrient deficient is their main problem. Now, people could react to, have gluten sensitivities and all that, and that's of course has to be considered, because people can react to any kind of food. But sugar, for example, is not pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, or directly toxic to the body like vegetable oils are. The only time sugar can become toxic is when it's fed, and this has only occurred in laboratory animals. They feed laboratory animals like 60% sugar diets. Well, there's no population where even comes close to that. Like, Americans consume more sugar per capita than anyone in the world, and we consume 21% of our diet on average as sugar. But we were consuming about that much in the 1930s, and we were phenomenally healthy back then, or relatively, other than the heart disease was going up. But we, in comparison to where we are now, we were, obesity was extremely low, about 3%. Diabetes was 0.37%. Metabolic syndrome, I don't think really hardly existed. Alzheimer's was rare. Macular degeneration was rare. Go on and on. And but I view that, the fact that, so refined flours and refined sugars, Weston Price found that these were problematic foods back in the 1930s. There is no question they are problematic. It's a matter of dose, though, and like all things. And those are not our primary problems. Are they problematic? Yes. And every single presentation I've ever given since 2016, so 7 years worth, I have said there are three things to reduce or eliminate in your diet: are refined flours, refined sugars, which is added sugars, and vegetable oils. But of those, I now tell people, try to completely eliminate vegetable oils from your diet, and substantially reduce sugars and refined flours if they're higher in your diet. And you, just by doing that, you'll automatically be consuming more natural foods and foods that are, non-toxic for the most part.
I mean, I definitely find that people feel better when they, switch within weeks. It's incredible. However, I'd like you to talk about the fact that, to me, what also is different about the seed oils compared to, the high carbs or processed sugar is the fact that these become part of our cells. And you mentioned in your book the 2 to 3 years of them basically, taking for it to come out of your body. I think that is a really important point to think about. So potentially, if you're a marathoner, I'm just making this up because I do work with some of them. I mean, they do the gels, they can burn off the glucose. But when you're eating the French fry thinking that you're going to burn another 100 calories, you are completely wrong, because it's completely different. So if you could explain that part a little bit.
You are absolutely 100% correct. So when we consume polyunsaturated fats, omega-6 and omega-3, like you get in vegetable oils, and you get both of those in vegetable oils. And any kind of fat has those fats in them, by the way, any kind of fat. So we accumulate these omega-6 fats. I'll just stick with that to keep this simple. We accumulate omega-6 fats in our bodies. We accumulate those in our cell membranes, our inner mitochondrial membranes, and in our body fat. what's called, scientists or physicians, we call it adipose. And the amount of that omega-6 is reflective of whatever you've been consuming in your diet for the past 3 years. And as you just said, Bonni, the omega-6 has the omega-6 linoleic acid, which is the primary omega-6 fat. It accounts for about 90% of the omega-6 we consume. It has a half-life in our body of 600 to 680 days. So we can round that off to approximately 2 years. So when you consume French fries that are made in vegetable oil, like you would get in almost every single restaurant in the world today, most of them, those oils then will take up residence in your body, and they will gradually accumulate, and you cannot quickly get rid of them. And again, as they accumulate, they set up this biological environment, or this biological milieu that is ripe to be pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic, and nutrient deficient. Now, let me contrast that for a second. Let's say you overeat carbohydrates. So the first thing that you do is, whether it's rice or potatoes or it's even sugar, so you will first replenish, you'll burn it for fuel if you need to right away, or you will replenish your glycogen stores, which is your carbohydrate stores, in your liver and then in your muscles. And let's say that those are then completely full. They can't take any more, which will happen if you consume enough carbohydrates, or you're regularly consuming carbohydrates, let's say. And now you've got an oversupply of carbohydrates. Well, the extra then has to be converted to something. Well, guess what your body converts it to? The first thing it converts it to is saturated fat. And the second most popular thing for it to convert it to is monounsaturated fat. It never, ever, ever converts it into omega-6. It can't. Your body cannot. So this is another reason that your body will, if you give it something healthy to eat, like a potato, just a white potato or a sweet potato, and you've got too many carbs already, it's going to convert it into saturated fat. Why would your body convert that into something that's unhealthy for you? That tells you right away that it's healthy. Sure.
I got to plug this in. Hold on.
Okay, sure.
Okay, no problem. I'm back now.
Okay, so it just makes sense, that we have to be cautious about what kind of fats we consume, because again, it'll take you. So once you stop eating vegetable oils, yes, it will take you 3 years to get your body fat adipose, or your adipose or body fat fatty acids down to an ancestral level. And that should be very low. It should be, your omega-6 linoleic acid should, on an ancestral diet, would be under 3%. But the omega-6 linoleic acid in Americans, for example, had already increased to 9.1% by 1959 in Americans. And by 2008, it was at 21.5%. And so this parallels, once again, obesity, diabetes, metabolic disease, Alzheimer's, coronary heart disease, cancers, all that all runs together with the more of these omega-6s we're accumulating in our body, the more at risk we are for all of these, for overweight, obesity, and all these diseases.
Well, you just said something I just want to repeat, because I think it is so important that I want to repeat it again. And that is that our own bodies, when it has extra energy from consuming carbohydrates, actually produces the very saturated fat that is supposed to be, the demon to kill us. And that's what our bodies does to us. Are you kidding? I'm just saying that
exactly.
When we think about it like that, it's like, are we? I don't think so. I think we are built for, survival here. And
exactly.
and there is, a reason. Now, of course, it's a little different, with the animals, which is why actually before we got on today, I was talking about particularly poultry, just because of the different digestive systems. So when they're consuming all of these seeds, different animals will get different amounts of these problematic fats that become part of their tissues, just like us eventually.
Exactly. Yeah. So beef or cattle or ruminants, the ungulates, the hoofed animals that are ruminants that have these multi-compartment chamber stomach systems. That one of those stomachs is a what I call a biohydrogenation chamber. That didn't come from me, so but that's a good term for it. But that single stomach can take foods that are high in omega-6 like corn and soy that cattle are fed in concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, and it can convert those omega-6s into saturated fat and monounsaturated fat and store that in their body fat. So cattle, they maintain a very low omega-6 no matter what you feed them. But now the monogastric animals, which includes humans, chickens, and pigs, and fish, for example, all of us, when we're fed high omega-6, we don't have a biohydrogenation chamber. We don't have this fermentation chamber where we can hydrogenate those omega-6s into saturated, monounsaturated fats, so we accumulate them. And so this is why chickens and pigs, for example, that are fed in CAFOs and fed corn and soy, they will develop very high levels of omega-6 in their body fat, just like humans. And I give an example. So the typical chickens and pigs, they'll get to 20+% omega-6 linoleic acid in their body fat. And we're eating those. Well, that's as high as canola oil, for example. And again, compare and contrast that to beef cattle, chickens, and pigs when they're fed an ancestral diet, which means no corn and soy, they're fed their natural diets. Mm-hmm. They're all around 2 to 2.5% omega-6 linoleic acid. That's where most of our omega-6 should be coming from, is those foods right there. I mean, that should be a big bulk of it.
It's hard. You cannot find a grass-fed chicken. I mean, I found them around the country, but they're hard to come by, is what I would tell you.
Yeah, we've done some work. We collaborated with Angel Acres Farm in Michigan. They're one of the few. They're just about the only farm that I know of that's raising chickens ancestrally in the United States. So they taste
different.
Chickens. Yeah, they do. They need to be fed some grain, but I can't remember exactly what her grain is, but they get alfalfa. I think they get some millet, but they feed off the land. They're eating bugs and worms and grubs, and they eat decaying meat and all sorts of things, but they'll eat grass, and if they can get fruit or vegetables, so chickens are not vegans. People need to understand they're omnivores. And when you see, they're fed a vegan diet, that's just it's like feeding, humans. We're not naturally vegans. And, it's the same thing for pigs. And when they're fed their natural diet, they're very low in omega-6. Well, so that is how, so we tested the fat in Angel Acres Farms chickens and in their chicken eggs. And, they're very, very low in omega-6. Like, for example, the eggs, they're about 1/5 the omega-6 linoleic acid of what you'd get in a CAFO raised chicken egg.
And I bet they taste completely different, because you lose all the flavor when you're just feeding them like one kind of food. Do you know they actually add chicken flavor to chicken now? I don't know if you're aware of that.
I did not know that, but
yeah,
nothing would surprise me.
That's how crazy this has gotten.
Yeah.
But well, I did mention this earlier, but I really would like you to talk about there was a study in your book about China and how they traditionally have been consuming the least amount of sugar, although arguably, of course, they do eat white rice, but now they are getting the most diabetes. And you had a good graph demonstrating about the correlation between the intake of the increase of seed oils with that. But I think that is kind of shocking for people to hear. And there's so many people that are struggling with pre-diabetes, diabetes, and they say now about 93% of the entire country has some sort of metabolic dysfunction. So, which of course precedes all of our other chronic diseases as well. So I feel like this is a really huge thing to mention.
Yeah, and this is brilliant. You asked this because I happen to have a few graphs laying here on my desk, handy, that I could reference.
Okay,
Otherwise,
well,
I don't have all of this in my head.
Oh, if you have permission, if you have it on to share your screen if you would like to.
Oh, I'll just discuss it. No, because I don't have it handy where I could pull that up quickly.
Okay.
But
all right, sure, no
but
problem.
I can share the data, and it'll hopefully achieve mostly the same effect. But China was interesting to me because I'm always looking for, you want to have a population preferably that had zero sugar, right? Well, China comes pretty close. China, since the 1960s, has had incredibly low sugar consumption, like around 20 calories per person per day back in 1961. They peaked at around 80 calories per person per day in the late 90s. And then it's dropped down a little bit. So they're typically been between 60 and 80 calories per person per day, which is only 2.5% of calories. This is the 8th lowest sugar consumption in the world for the data that's available, which covers about 170 some countries. This data comes from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Okay, but now let me just tell you quickly that their vegetable oil consumption, however, was about 30 calories per day in 1961, also very low. That's about 3 grams. And then by 2018, their vegetable oil consumption was 204 calories per day. You have to divide that by 9. So it's whatever, that's about 10, 20 some grams a day, right? Okay, so they went from about 3 grams to 20 some grams of vegetable oils per day on average. And so this is what happened to them with this is in their overweight and obesity during the period of about from 1991, overweight and obesity climbed from 15.3% to 42% by 2013, I believe it was. All right, 15.3% to 42%. Their cancer incidence rose from 495 per 100,000 in 1991 to 1,587 per 100,000 by 2016, I believe it was. So their cancer incidence went up more than 3-fold, right, during this period. So yeah, cancer went up 3.2-fold between, I should have been looking at some other data, between 1990 and 2017. Diabetes increased from 3.7% in 1990 to 6.7% in 2017. All right, so it almost doubled. Cardiovascular disease increased 15% between 1990 and 2017. We talked about overweight and obesity, and there was also, get this, a 465% increase in lung cancer while the smoking decreased. Vegetable oils are a strong contributor to smoking, and it's particularly dangerous when you cook with them because you heat them, and this was proven. Yeah, and you're inhaling the aerosolized advanced lipid oxidation end products. And they were trying to figure out what was causing higher lung cancer in women in the 1980s in China, 9/10 of which I think it was that were getting lung cancer had never smoked a cigarette. And they eventually connected it to the fact that they were much more commonly cooking with rapeseed oil in wok type cooking without good ventilation. And so they're being exposed to these vegetable oils. But all these things, cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, overweight and obesity, lung cancer, all this going through the roof, right? With almost no sugar in the diet. 2.5% of the diet is sugar, which is incredibly low.
And can we assume, just because I think people might ask about, they're known for eating a lot of white rice, that remained somewhat stable. They didn't have like an explosion of rice consumption.
Yeah, I actually don't have the data on rice consumption itself, and I don't know if that exists. So I could not tell you for sure. Generally speaking, when like in Japan, the rice consumption has gone way down over and they've had even worse health outcomes since 1960s in a very similar scenario in Japan, with their total calories, their carbohydrates, and their sugar all going down, while all of these, like obesity and all these other diseases, go through the roof. But their sugar consumption and their white rice consumption went way down. And I could give specific details on that if you want me to.
No, I think that's it. I mean, to me, it is, again, I think it's shocking just how we switched shocking. Everything. So I think what would be helpful now, if we could spend a little time going over I think these things are so ubiquitous in our food supply. I mean, I think it's, impossible for the majority of people, unless they have access to the farm, to avoid them. But if you would go through the top things that we should avoid and what to eat, of course, in your book, you detail this, greatly.
Okay, sure. So the top things to avoid, I would say, number one is all of the seed oil type vegetable oils. That would be so soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, rapeseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, sesame, and peanut oils. I would try to avoid those. I would just mostly keep sugar consumption fairly low. I mean, I certainly wouldn't recommend, sugar sweetened beverages or, a lot of added sugars. I just would keep sugars low because it's nutrient deficient food. I would reduce or eliminate refined flours of every type. So whole flours would be better as long as they're tolerated. In other words, if people who have gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, of course, they cannot be consuming gluten. I think it's by far and away, it's going to be safer if you can afford it to go organic. That way you'll reduce, not eliminate, but reduce your consumption of herbicides, pesticides, and you'll be avoiding GMO products. And the GMO products, they're the ones that have been sprayed with glyphosate, poison, Roundup. And so that's very problematic. So those to me are the main things to avoid. And if I can just say this, Bonni, how do we just get that far in our diet? You really need to, for the most part, prepare your own food. It's just really hard. If somebody else is preparing your food, you're going to really have to work at it in order to make sure you're not getting vegetable oils, for example, because vegetable oils are ubiquitous in our food supply. They're ubiquitous they're almost the exclusive oils used in restaurant cooking, fast food cooking, and in almost all processed foods. You will rarely find butter, healthy lard, or beef tallow in processed foods. So that would be a big start right there.
But okay, I have a trick question for you.
Sure.
If you had to give a choice, you're out to eat, to either eat conventionally raised chicken or farm raised fish, what would you choose and why? I have my answer, but I want to know if you agree with me. It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of is. Well, the farm raised fish is going to be a lot lower in omega-6. And so,
Really?
yeah, for sure. It's going to be a lot lower in omega-6. I can't give you those numbers right off the top of my head,
That's
but you know,
okay.
fish is naturally really, really extremely low. Wild caught fish is extremely low in omega-6. And so, but it definitely will accumulate to much, to substantially higher degrees, but it doesn't even begin to compare to what chicken or pork would get to. So just in terms of the omega-6, I would say that you're going to be far better off with farm raised fish. But that's my view. And I might, that one is, you did throw me a curve there. I hadn't thought about that one specifically, but I should go to my book and look at what the omega-6 gets to, because I can't remember what that one. I'm a
These are
numbers
the
guy, but
tough
I can't remember that
questions.
number.
I mean, the microplastics, the toxins, all the pesticides. I mean,
Yeah.
but these are, you got to eat something if you're hungry and you're out. It's just, these are the kind of things that people are dealing with that are watching, that do go out. I mean, I live in Sarasota here, where it's a retirement community. So this is part of my daily discussion with people, is how to go out to eat. And so I do give them a handout to try to pick, obviously not doing the dressing, get steamed vegetables with the actual olive oil butter on the side, and then what animals to try to pick out. But it's definitely like going in a minefield, and trying to avoid these things. But I think we can greatly eliminate it for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is
Yeah.
not, but when people do make, those changes, I think
Mm-hmm.
they do feel so much better, that to me, that should be the motivation on a daily basis. Right? I would hope.
Absolutely, and I tell people that, I mean, it may take months to really start. Let's say, for example, if weight loss is your goal, that it may take a few weeks or a few months, where the elimination of vegetable oils is really starting to catch up, and you're getting those results that you want. But you will be metabolically healthy with healthier within hours after eliminating vegetable oils from your consumption, because the fact that they're pro-inflammatory, the inflammatory mediators the vegetable oils drive, those, like the inflammatory prostaglandins, eicosanoids, leukotrienes, thromboxanes. All of these, they drive inflammation, vasoconstriction, and clotting. And these will drop within hours after getting the vegetable oils and your omega-6 down. So you will be, if you don't eat vegetable oils today, you will be at lower risk of a heart attack and stroke tonight.
Wow. So can this explain why sometimes after a meal, like, you just feel like lethargic and, way down? I think when you're eating the French fries, potatoes, and things like that.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if that is so complex. That's such an easy question. There's so many complex things going on there. I think a lot of the fatigue, Bonni, you might know this better than me, but I think a lot of this fatigue is driven by nutrient deficiencies in terms of minerals, and this is another entire topic. But we are extremely mineral deficient in our population, because of the fact that we have so much processed food. If you think about it, by 2009, 63% of the American diet was made up of vegetable oils, sugars, refined flours, and trans fats. 63%. Well, those don't have any really all up beneficial vitamins or minerals. I mean, we've got the vegetable oils will have some vitamin E and vitamin K1, but other than that, none of them have any minerals, right? Or they're just almost completely mineral deficient. And there goes 63% of your diet as with food that provides you no nutrition that your body needs. And we are James DeNicolantonio has presented this in his book, The Mineral Fix, and he's talked about it on many podcasts, that 30% of Americans have 10 or more mineral deficiencies. And probably lots of Americans have 20 and 30 or more mineral deficiencies. We need 82 minerals in our diets. People just don't think about all these, and we're extremely deficient in magnesium, potassium, and calcium, but also copper and iron are very, very common. And it's all because of our nutrient deficient diets. But those nutrient deficiencies will drive fatigue.
And I would also say they drive hunger, because we also are hungry or have an appetite. It's beyond the major macronutrients. And I think, like I was talking about the chickens earlier having no flavor, we really eat food also for the flavor, because the flavor that was in food before, like tomatoes that now taste like cardboard, those flavors actually are associated with nutrients that used to be there that we need, like the minerals. So that's why, all of the flavorings and all that. There was a fantastic book I read called The Dorito Effect, which I recommend that one, but that's what he talks about that. Yeah, it was pretty interesting just what's happened to our food supply. All right, just one more little comment here. Because I just know this is really a driver for many people, and that is obesity. And one of the things that you laid out so nicely in your book was the way that these affected our fat cells and our mitochondria, inflammation, and our appetite. And I thought you did an excellent job in explaining how these fats are really connected with obesity. So maybe we could end by discussing that for a bit.
Yes, absolutely. Probably the most important topic that we could even discuss. I believe, and I've presented on this at multiple conferences, that in my view, the vegetable oils are accounting for probably about 90% of obesity worldwide. It's not necessarily, just 90% in any single given population, but if we look at the whole world, I think that's where 90% of the problem is. The main reason this is, and I don't think I'll go into every single mechanism, but the main reason that I believe this is it's number one is the high omega-6 diets are damaging to the inner mitochondrial membrane of our mitochondria. And when they damage the mitochondria, we have, I'm going to keep this a very high level, we have loss of energy production through the electron transport chain. And when that happens, the cells cannot properly burn fat for fuel, because you've dismantled the most fundamental operation, which is the electron transport chain, to produce energy. So the cells then will begin to just store the fat, which becomes lipid droplets. And at the same time, this damage to this electron transport chain causes increased reactive oxygen species. And the immediate effect of that is insulin resistance. And so everybody talks about the fact that all of these disorders, overweight, obesity, and then even all these seemingly disparate conditions like atherosclerosis, coronary heart disease, strokes, cancers, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, all of these, Alzheimer's, all these disorders, they all share mitochondrial dysfunction and insulin resistance at their core. Well, so why do they share this at their the most fundamental level? It's because they're all connected by this mitochondrial dysfunction, which is driven by the seed oil and the high omega-6 diets. So now if you go back to that cellular level where it said the cell then begins to store the fats because it can't properly burn those for fuel. Well, the cell is a microcosm of the entire body. So we're just whatever we are, something like a 40 trillion cell mass. And that's what's happening all over our bodies. We're storing fat that can't properly be burned for fuel because of this high omega-6. And we're gaining weight, but we're also tired, fatigued, because we can't properly burn fat for fuel. We can burn carbohydrates for fuel properly still because that's glycolysis, and that's outside of the mitochondria. And so we're still running that okay. That runs okay. And this is why, as you're gaining weight, as you gain weight or become obese, you tend to be, fatigued, probably for a lot of reasons, but this is a major reason. You're fatigued, you're gaining weight, and you're really now craving carbohydrates because at least you can burn those properly for fuel still. So all this fits together, in my view, based primarily on what I just described there. There's other mechanisms, which I won't get into, but that are reviewed in the book.
But the hunger, yes, the cannabinoid system and how it makes you hungry on top of that. So that
absolutely,
I just think, this is it's like the perfect storm, right? It's like we have all this fat, but we can't get to it, and all of that. Well, I think this was great. Is there anything else you would like to share?
I'll just share this. I'll leave this at the very last. This is, if I can bring this up here, this is our new book called The Ancestral Diet Revolution. And this reviews all of this kind of information and so much more. And that book is available at online retail booksellers like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Books A Million, all those. And I would just ask anyone who reads it, we would love to get your review on Amazon because it helps spread the message. And again, it's beneficial to our nonprofit foundations and to our goals of getting this message out there, and our goals of doing further research that supports this kind of evidence that we hope one day will change allopathic medicine, will change conventional medicine, and physicians will begin to understand this and tell their patients about it. And so that's our ultimate goals, is to change the world in this way.
Well, I am on board, and after reading the book, I would just also share with the 1,200 plus references that are in there. That was amazing, and all of the charts to really illustrate all of your points was really helpful, and again quite shocking. So it wasn't just one random thing. And to me, the bottom line is we're eating food that is actually not meant for humans.
Couldn't agree more. We are.
That's it. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this interview. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonni. It's been an honor and pleasure.